Episode titled Cursed Fridge. It was a normal morning in the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was making breakfast. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. Peppa was playing with George when Peppa noticed a strange corner of the kitchen. In it stood a refrigerator she had never seen before. It was tall, old, with a dark metal door slightly flickering in the morning light. Peppa approached and sniffed it. The smell was strange, cold, and slightly sweet. Curiosity took over. Peppa opened the door, and a blast of cold air hit her. Inside it was dark, but she saw a small glowing space, as if the refrigerator was not a normal fridge, but a tiny tunnel. She leaned in, and suddenly the door slammed shut behind her. Peppa tried to open it, but the handle was heavy, as if some magical force was holding her inside. Peppa started to panic. She pushed, pulled, but the door wouldn't budge. The light inside the refrigerator was strange, changing from bright blue to dim red. Peppa saw her reflection on the wall, but it was slightly wrong. The eyes were wider and the smile too large. Peppa shivered and stepped back. Inside the fridge, the space seemed bigger than it should be. Boxes and bottles were arranged like a narrow corridor. Peppa walked forward, and the corridor stretched endlessly. Occasionally, she heard faint creaks and rustles, as if someone was walking nearby. But when she turned, no one was there. She called, "Mummy! Daddy! George!" But her voice echoed and disappeared into the strange space. She found a small door deeper inside the refrigerator. She opened it and entered an even stranger section, darker with heavy air. Peppa felt the refrigerator watching every movement. She tried to go back, but the path had vanished. It seemed the fridge itself was changing the corridors, trapping her. Time inside became distorted. Clocks on the walls spun too fast or slowed down completely. Peppa felt tired but kept walking, searching for an exit. Suddenly, she saw a small light at the end of the corridor. She ran toward it, hoping for freedom. When the light reached the door, Peppa pushed it hard and emerged into the kitchen. The refrigerator was in its place, but looked old and normal. It no longer flickered. Peppa sat on the floor, catching her breath. Mummy Pig came over and hugged her. "Peppa, what happened?" she asked. Peppa could not explain at once. She only stared at the refrigerator. It seemed to flicker slightly in the corner again. Her heart was racing. She knew this strange refrigerator was not ordinary, and she understood that some things in the house are better left alone. Episode titled The Time Loop. It was a normal morning. Everything in the Pig family house was calm. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast in the kitchen. Daddy Pig was sitting at the table reading a newspaper. George was playing on the floor with his dinosaur. Peppa came downstairs and said hello. Everything looked the same as always. She sat at the table. Mummy Pig said, "Peppa, breakfast is ready." Peppa smiled. She started eating. Everything went as usual. After breakfast, Peppa went outside. She played, ran, and laughed. The day passed calmly. In the evening, she went to sleep. The night was quiet. In the morning, Peppa opened her eyes. She went downstairs. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. George was playing. Mummy Pig said, "Peppa, breakfast is ready." Peppa stopped. Everything was exactly the same. She said nothing. She sat down again. Everything repeated. Peppa went outside. She tried to do something different. She walked in another direction, but she still ended up on the same road. In the evening, she went to sleep. In the morning, everything started again. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. George was playing. Peppa looked at them. She already knew what would happen. The day repeated again and again. Peppa started noticing details. Sometimes George said "dinosaur" at the same moment. Sometimes Daddy Pig turned the page at the same time. Peppa tried to change the day. She did not go outside. She hid. But in the evening, she still fell asleep. In the morning, everything started again. One time, she did not go downstairs. She stayed in her room. She sat quietly. She waited. Then she heard a voice. "Peppa, breakfast is ready." The voice was closer. Peppa did not answer. Then the door slowly opened. Mummy Pig stood there, but she did not move. She just looked. Then she said, "You have to live this day." Peppa closed her eyes. In the morning, everything looked normal. She went downstairs. Everything was the same. But now, Peppa noticed one thing. The clock on the wall was not moving. Episode titled Creepy Copies. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa was playing in her room. Suddenly, she noticed something strange in the kitchen. She walked over to the door, peered inside, and froze. There, standing at the table, was a copy of herself. "Peppa!" Mummy Pig called out, but Peppa didn't respond as her copy smiled and took a step aside, mimicking her every move. "Mom!" Peppa shouted, but when she turned around, the copy had disappeared. Peppa thought it must have been her imagination. She returned to her room and resumed playing. However, the next morning, when Peppa entered the kitchen, the situation repeated itself. This time, the copy was dressed differently, and there was something off about her. Her smile was wider and her eyes brighter. She stood at the table, staring at Peppa. Peppa froze. "Mom!" she shouted again, but Mummy Pig didn't notice anything strange. Everything seemed fine. Peppa began to fear that her imagination was playing tricks on her, but the strange occurrences continued. Every morning, when she entered the kitchen or the living room, she would see a new copy of herself. They looked similar, but each time something changed. One copy was slightly taller, another had a more vacant, strange expression on her face. Sometimes they just stood there watching, and other times they would mimic Peppa's actions. Peppa tried to ignore them, but the more she did, the more they appeared. One evening, after Peppa returned from the garden, she heard someone laughing in her room. It was her laugh, but with an unsettling edge to it. Peppa walked into the room and saw a group of her copies. They were all sitting, watching her and giggling. Each copy was slightly different from the last, and their laughter had taken on an eerie quality. Peppa felt a chill down her spine and tried to leave, but the door was locked. She was trapped. The copies began moving toward her, mimicking her every movement, as if they were her, but with something darker in their eyes. "You can't leave," one of the copies said. "We are all part of you." Peppa was terrified. She tried to escape, but no door would open. Everything felt like a nightmare. Each copy seemed to want to replace her. Soon, all the copies disappeared. Peppa woke up in her room. She wasn't sure if it had been a dream or reality, but she definitely felt that something was wrong. The next morning, Peppa woke up and, as usual, went to the kitchen. But her heart stopped when she saw that sitting at the table was a new copy of herself. This one had an even stranger smile and eyes. Episode titled Endless Creepy Rain. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was preparing breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa and George were playing in their room. Everything felt calm, but then the sky began to grow dark and the house became dimmer. Peppa looked out of the window and saw something strange. The rain had started falling, but it wasn't normal. It was black. At first, Peppa didn't understand what was happening. She stepped closer to the window and watched as the rain fell to the ground, leaving dark streaks, and the air seemed to carry a strange smell. "Mummy! Daddy!" Peppa called out. "What is this?" Mummy Pig peeked out the window and felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't just rain. This was dark, endless rain that wouldn't stop. It kept falling, and with each drop, something in the air felt more unsettling. "Daddy, what do we do?" Peppa asked. Daddy Pig tried to reassure them. "Don't worry," he said. "It's just a strange storm. We'll stay inside, and everything will be fine." But despite his words, Peppa felt more anxious with every passing moment. The world outside the window seemed to vanish. She could hear the rain tapping on the roof, and every sound felt strange. This rain wasn't normal. It was dark, and it was endless. As the hours passed, the rain grew stronger. The house became darker, and even the lamps inside couldn't seem to light up the space, and the air felt thick with the weight of the rain. Peppa sat with George in her room, trying not to think about what was happening outside. That evening, as the family gathered in the living room, they heard strange noises. The rain wasn't stopping, but now it sounded like whispers. The noise was barely audible, but it was enough to make Peppa's heart race. "What's that?" she whispered. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig exchanged a glance. They couldn't tell what was going on. For a moment, Peppa felt something moving in the house. She turned and saw that one of the window panes had become even darker. The rain wasn't just black. It was like it was seeping inside, obscuring everything. The lights flickered. The room was plunged into total darkness. Peppa was terrified and gripped George's hand tightly. "We need to stay together," said Mummy Pig, trying to remain calm. But in that moment, Peppa noticed that something had changed outside. The dark rain had started to thicken, and strange shadows appeared outside the window. Shadows that didn't belong to any animals, any people. They were figures, moving on their own. The whispers grew louder. Peppa and her family heard them more clearly, as if something was right outside. "We can't go out," Peppa said. "This rain won't stop." They all huddled in the living room, and Mummy Pig turned on every lamp to light up the room. But despite the light, the darkness outside grew deeper. Suddenly, they heard a knock on the window. Peppa ran to the window and peeked outside. She saw silhouettes of people or creatures standing in the shadow. She quickly closed the curtains and ran to her parents. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a storm. It was something more. All night, Peppa and her family hid in the house while the rain continued to pour. It was endless, and there was no sound to comfort them. Peppa felt like something was watching them. This rain was something terrible. When morning came, the rain still hadn't stopped. But when Peppa approached the window, she noticed that the darkness outside had started to recede. She saw the first light of the day breaking through the black drops. The rain was finally beginning to stop, and the world was becoming visible again. But Peppa still felt a strange, uneasy fear in her heart. The rain had stayed with her. Episode titled, Peppa's Creepy Eyes. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa and George were playing on the floor. Peppa felt as usual, happily playing with her toys. But today, something strange began to happen. She suddenly felt a weird sensation in her eyes. At first, it was a light tingling, and then it felt like someone was pulling her eyes, stretching them. She didn't pay much attention to it at first. Breakfast passed like usual, but Peppa still felt a strange heaviness in her eyes. When she went to her room to play, she looked in the mirror and froze. Under her eyes, 2 new small eyes had appeared, moving as if they were alive. Peppa couldn't understand what was happening, but the eyes clearly weren't hers. "Mummy! Daddy!" she cried, but no one came. Peppa stepped closer to the mirror and saw the new eyes turning, following her movements. She touched them, but they were cold and unmoving. When Mummy Pig entered the room, she didn't notice anything unusual. Peppa tried to explain what was happening to her, but she couldn't find the words. The new eyes kept watching her, moving on their own, and Peppa began to doubt whether she was losing her mind. That evening, when the family sat down for dinner, Peppa felt another eye appear on her neck. It was smaller, but just like the others. Soon, there were several more, on her forehead, on her arms, and each eye was watching. Peppa tried to hide them, but they kept becoming more active. and with every passing moment, she felt like she was losing control over her own body. Peppa tried to run out of the house, but every time she turned around, the eyes were following her, creating an overwhelming sense of being watched. One night, she woke up to a strange whispering. At first, she thought it was in her head, but soon she realized that it was coming from her eyes. "Don't be afraid," the eyes on her neck whispered softly. Peppa screamed and ran into the hallway. She locked the door, but in a moment her eyes started moving again, lifting up to the mirror, looking in different directions. All of her eyes, as if under control, started whispering the same thing. "You're not alone." A sense of dread and fear overtook Peppa. She didn't know what was happening to her. Only one thought kept spinning in her mind. What if these eyes weren't just a part of her, but something more? What if they were watching her, waiting to take her away?